What's up, guys? Josh Shaw here with the Card Guys, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Today we're going to be designing some new warrior cards. So, well, it's no secret that I am a little bit disappointed with the recent warrior designs, and I thought, you know what? I'll throw my hat in the ring and I will attempt to make some cards based on my experiences with the warrior class for the last 5 years. I've gotten a lot of questions from people saying, like, all right, Josh, how would you, fix the warrior class? How would you design some warrior cards? So I thought, I'd share some of my thoughts. Actually, sit down, try to design cards instead of just, speaking in some generalities. All right, so today, how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, we're going to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the warrior class, and we're going to try to design a card that, or cards, I'm going to be showing you guys two cards, design some cards that fix those weaknesses or, amplify those strengths. And obviously, we want to still stick with the core identity of warrior. So we're going to identify what is the core of warrior and, try to design some cards that makes sense. I also am going to try to design cards that are applicable to all five warriors. This is not an easy task because all five warriors play quite differently from each other, especially Bolton. Bolton, has attack actions, is, wildly different than the other two heroes. Freudian slip there. Other four heroes. I love you, Kasai players. Uh, yeah, so we're gonna try to design a card that or cards that are applicable for all the warriors. Now you might be like, "Hey, Josh, isn't Blade Flurry, that card?" Not really. That's not a card that's seen in Bolton, and it's not a card that's seen in like DGA warriors or more defensive warriors. So I really want it to apply to as many styles of warrior and as many heroes as possible. Now, it can be very, very easy to just print a overpowered card. That is not what we're trying to do here. There are many cards in the game that are very, very strong. Codex, Conqueror of the High Seas, Felling of the Crown. There are Traverse the Universe. There are many, many cards that are very, very, very strong. And simply printing a strong card, yes, that is nice, but that's not going. I'm trying to address some core issues here. And, it's easy to print something overpowered. It's not easy to print something that is, beautifully designed and balanced. So we're going to try to create something that is strong, but not like ridiculously strong. Finally, if we can make the cards a little bit more thematic and evocative of the warrior class and the warrior life, that's a bonus. So I tried to make the card name and found some art that I thought would be a nice fit. So all right, so let's jump into the strengths and weaknesses of warrior, and that will help us create a card that addresses those things. So let's start off by talking about the strengths of warrior. So warriors in Flesh and Blood are the quintessential mid-range deck. All five warriors can be built in many, many different ways, and they often adapt to the metagame. They adapt to their opponent. They adapt to the speed at which the game is going and the tendencies of their opponents. This is something that, especially if you are a Dorinthia player, you are very, very familiar with being able to adapt to the level of your opponent. This is something that I've said many, many times. You need to adapt to the level of your opponent. You need to adapt to their tendencies. And that is one of the ways you can squeeze out extra value. Being adaptive and flexible is very good because it allows you to speed up, slow down. It generally creates a more stable matchup spread. A few years ago, I think I did a statistical analysis on Dorinthia and found that her matchup spread was actually the most condensed of all the heroes in the game because she wasn't wildly favored or wildly unfavored because she could handle a lot of different situations. Um, Warriors are the class that puts the opponents into no-win situations. Now, assassins have stolen a lot of the thunder here, but this is still a core identity, I think, of warrior is that whether you block or don't block, there really isn't a right answer. You block Dorinthia, she gets reprised. You don't block Dorinthia, she gets Dawnblade counters. You block Bolton, his hero ability gets turned on. You don't block Bolton, well, now things like Bolt of Courage, Engulfing Light, Lumina Ascension on the Raiden, like these things start to hit. Fang, you don't block Fang, all right, he gets fealty. You do block Fang, well, he could go around with, Pledge Fealty, Tooth of the Dragon, or he can just pump over by, or there's many different ways that Fang can approach that. Kasai, same thing. If you don't block Kasai, she generates copper and gold, and then you pay for it later. Olympia, you let him win several wagers. He does something with gold. Who knows what, but he does something with gold because gold is a payoff. So basically, all the warriors, no matter whether you block them or don't block them, they gain some value from that, and they consistently ask their opponent, "Hey, are you going to make the right decision? Are you going to make the right decision?" And eventually, the opponent will make the wrong decision, and they'll lose some value. Being a weapon-based deck does mean that they are very resilient to fatigue, especially dual-wield warriors. These are some of the strongest decks against decks that just want to block you out. They often have cards that allow for a large burst of damage at the end of the game. For example, Fang has Hunt's End. He can also set up things with Fire and Brimstone. Kasai has Raise an Army, Blood on her hands, and the Centauri Sabers are just by default very difficult to block for the whole game. In addition, they are very consistent. So these are decks that generally, as long as they draw the correct cards, they have a pretty consistent game plan, turn to turn to turn. So yeah. There are also multiple styles available to each of these heroes. For example, you could play Dawnblade Dory, you could play Hatchet's Dory. With Bolton, you had the combo, although that's kind of phased out now. And you have Raiden styles. In Kasai, you had a more defensive style, or you had a more, try to draw a lot of cards, draw size style. Even Fang has, the super red line builds and maybe the more mid-range style. Not even to mention things like Decimator Great Axe, adding a whole nother facet to the class. Another strength of warriors is that they block very well. They have very solid armor. I think them and Guardians probably have the strongest blocking armor in the game. Valiant Dynamos is a hell of a card, and most of the warrior class cards block for 3. There is a little bit of a trend for the attack reactions that aren't majestic to block for 2, and it is what it is. But in general, every single time you drop 4 cards, you're probably blocking at least 11. Minor strength, I'm just going to write, I wrote this because, this is a trend that we're starting to see, and, a trend of the class identity is that they're very strong against weapon-based decks. So the original, from WTR, we had Steelblade Shunt, dealing damage to the opponent if they attack with a weapon. And then most recently, we had Kabuto of Imperial Authority being printed that, shuts down weapon-based decks. All right, so here are all the strengths that I can think of for warriors. There's several others, but I think this is a good summary for what warriors are and what warriors are good at. So let's take a look at some of the weaknesses of the warrior class. So the warrior class has always been particularly susceptible to arcane damage and split damage. So, Kano Verdance, Acilio. At base, we have to give up some of the really top tier armor to run Arcane Barrier, and that's just really tough. Also, a lot of turns require a blue to operate, so if you're pitching for Arcane Barrier, your offense tends to stall as well. Split damage is also very annoying for most warrior decks to deal with because we block very well physically, and again, if we have to pitch for something, our turn typically falls apart. So opponents generally know that even if we present like AB1 against Runeblade, we may not always want to pitch to that. It's more of like a way to ensure that we don't just lose the game at the end of the game. Another weakness for the warriors is that if there's an ultra defensive deck, certain warrior decks just cannot deal with this. The most classic example was like Dawnblade Dorinthia against 20D React Oldhim. It didn't really matter how much extra skill you had in that matchup. Once the Guardian player had a certain amount of D-reacts, you were really in trouble. And if you aren't running a sideboard dedicated to dealing with ultra defensive decks, surprise, Fatigue Bravo can just, steal games from you. Ice-based decks have also been a problem for Warrior historically because of the need for you either want to pitch one card or you don't want to pitch any cards. And ice-based decks, with things that start on board, for example, like Stalagmite, you have to play around that. The fact that they can give you frostbites on your own turn through Blizzard. Icelander was also very, very difficult as well. So, yeah, frostbites, blizzards, stalagmite, all these type of things, very, very tough for a lot of the warriors to deal with, especially Fang. Fang being such a red line deck, getting a single frostbite generally means you have to have a whole nother card. If you get blizzarded as Fang, your turn really falls apart. Traditionally, Warrior also does not have a lot of 6-power cards. Now, Bolton is a small exception. He has things like Cataclysm, Bolting Blade, stuff like that. But in general, Warrior is stuck running Command and Conquer and, generic cards like Blanche and Battlefront Bastion and stuff like that. We do have Runner Runner. That is a card I quite like. But in general, we're not running a ton of 6-power plus cards, and that does make us a little bit weak to Herald and Spectra and all those type of things that the Illusionist class has. Now, this might be the greatest weakness of Warriors at the moment, is the fact that their card pool is extremely siloed. So what do I mean by that? That means we have a whole subset of cards that are only used in one hero. So all the reprise-based cards basically go to Dorinthia. Bolton is his own thing. All the wager cards are their own thing. All the dagger-focused stuff is for Fang. And there's not a lot of cross-pollination other than Blade Flurry and Valiant Dynamos and Grains of Bloodspill. The decks are, very, very wildly apart. Now, we also have, one-handed weapon support, so things like Blade Runner. We have things that specify axes, like Cleave. We have things that specify target Dawnblade, target Raiden, right? So there's a lot of cards that just cannot be used in other decks. For example, in the Hunted, that was a warrior set. But what did most warriors get? They got 3 cards. They got Jagged Edge, Provoke, and Sharpened Senses, because every other card said target dagger. And there's only one real dagger warrior in the game at the moment. Although I did try to make Dagger Dory work. But yeah, a lot of the issues with Warrior is that they have a wide card pool. They don't have a deep card pool. And that's really what we're going to try to address with the 2 cards, is create a card that is useful in all the warriors and all the styles, instead of making a card that says target 2-handed sword, I forgot what Nathan said, on a Tuesday with a hilt, gets +3 and go again. Like, we really don't want to make cards like that, all right? Another weakness of Warrior is that their hands can be very, very clunky if they lack the right texture. For example, if you're playing a dual wield warrior and you don't have a go again, you got to dig for it with gold. If you're Kasai, or you got to, block and, just send back what you can. If you draw a hand with multiple reds and you don't have like Crown of Providence or Sink Below, your turn often looks really bad because you have to pitch multiple cards for that. Now, Grains of Bloodspill did address this a little bit, because Vigor tokens are actually, really, really good for a warrior. The way that they've started to implement tokens for Warrior, I think, is really, really good. Vigor tokens, Agility tokens, and Courage tokens are all very, very good for Warrior, and that's a good step in the right direction. But sometimes you're not going to have those, and this can create a loss of tempo, or just hands converting into 6 damage or even less. So yeah, that's a weakness. Another weakness of Warrior is that it tends to lose power against very strong opponents that understand the hero very well and understand the card pool very well. For example, Dorinthia is a deck that, if your opponent knows every possibility based on the amount of cards you have, the pitch that you have and all that, if they can assess the threat of your turn and make the right decision consistently, you lose a lot of power in warrior. For example, if they know whether to block your spoils of war or not, as Kasai, that hurts. If they know whether or not to deny you fealty, as Fang, if they know to block your Lumina Raiden swings, these are a lot of things that uh, once players start doing these things, it gets hard. Another weakness of Warrior is that their class-based blues are weak. Now, Glint the Quicksilver is goated, and it drops off a cliff very, very, very quickly after that. Olympia has a couple nice ones, but they're only for him. So one of the cards that we're going to take a look at is going to be a blue-based. Well, you'll see very, very soon. All right, so yeah. So now that we have the strengths and the weaknesses of warriors, let's take a look at one of the cards that I've designed, and then I'll kind of break it down, and we'll go from there. All right, so the first card that I want to show you guys is Point of Contact. So this is a 0-cost blue pitch warrior action aura that blocks for 3, and it's majestic. And it says, instant destroy point of contact, remove 3 energy counters, gain 1 resource. At the end of your turn, if this has fewer than 3 energy counters and a weapon you control has hit, you may put an energy counter on it. If you have dealt damage this turn, you may play this as an instant, and your next attack this turn gets +1 power. Go again. All right, this card has a lot of text on it. Let me basically break this down into the 2 sections. So the first section is a pseudo tunic, right? This is a aura that will sit on the board and accumulate counters, eventually getting to 3 energy counters, and then you can use that as a tunic resource. The bottom half of the card is kind of like a warrior version of Spellbound Creepers. This allows you to give go again during the resolution step or in the reaction step if you really want to, if you've hit already, and gives you a little boost of power. So if you've dealt damage, you can play this as an instant because it has go again. You get your action point back, and then you can continue. And because you've dealt damage, you're going to end the turn and then put an energy counter on it, and then it'll be ready to go in 2 more turns. All right, so let me break down this card for you guys. So I think this card is a very, very beautiful answer for a lot of the issues that Warrior has. And a lot of the issues with Warrior is 1 resource is a massive difference for a lot of cards. And this card existing will help open up more deck building for Warrior. Now, this could be, simple things like on defense, Oasis Respite, Steelblade Shunt, that type of thing. Or it can be offensive. Got Resounding Courage here, Endear Devotion. This is a card that a lot of Fang players have taken out because they just don't have that 1 resource sitting around. Cards like Commanding Performance is very strong, but paying 1 resource is really, really, really not where you want to be. Basically, this card can enable more versions of decks, and because you have 1 resource in a few turns, this creates a smoother hand for you, and it opens up different lines for you, and especially at the end of the game, having 2 or 3 of these at full strength will allow you to make a nice play at the end of the game, maybe with overpower or whatever you have, or allows you to keep 1 extra card because this is pseudo 1 extra card draw at the end of the game. Also, providing a reaction speed source of action points is very, very nice because it allows you to basically not have to commit your glint, for example, or basically you get to play this after damage, get your action point back, continue with your turn, get a little bit of a bonus as well for dealing damage. The +1 is basically a courage token that you have to use immediately on that turn. Courage tokens are very, very useful for all the warriors. Dorinthia gets to a break point. Bolton's hero ability turns online. Kasai's more likely to hit for copper and gold. Fang, just extra damage is extra damage for him. Even Olympia could use a +1 as well. So having that +1 is also is really, really nice. Having this on the board creates a nice, interesting situation where it's like, okay, do I Do I use this now? Do I try to save up 2 or 3 of these? There's some counterplay that the opponent could do because this is an aura, so this you can target this. Um, and yeah, basically the fact that if we have something similar to this, we would basically not have to run Tunic, which is a pretty big deal because I think Grains of Bloodspill is a really, really beautifully designed card, and it's a card that I really want to run in every warrior if I can. But sometimes Tunic is just super important, and I'd like to see us kind of move away from Tunic and start to play more of our class cards. So yeah, I think this is a nice, beautifully designed card. It's a blue block 3. It can be played on defense. It's one of those cards that gets a little bit better if you can predict whether or not your opponent wants to block or not. And yeah, it's a card that also creates a little bit of tension of like, does your opponent want to let you hit and put counters on this, and eventually build up. Yeah, and having one extra resource also unlocks a lot of different play patterns for a lot of different decks. So let me quickly run through some play patterns that this enables. For example, Dawnblade Dorinthia, you have Warrior's Valor, and you have a 1-cost pump, and you can basically use this to swing again, threaten a Dawnblade counter. If you're part of the Hatchet group and you have 1 Vigor token, you play like a Take It on the Chin or something, and then you have Point of Contact as an aura for your second resource, or you can use this as a go again after you've hit. If you're playing as Kasai, this could basically, enable you to draw with gold, or this could create a situation where you get a very, very smooth turn because sometimes the 1-cost go agains are a little bit clunky in Kasai because she draws uh, a yellow, she doesn't draw a blue, so this can kind of fix some of those. For Fang, Fang doesn't run a lot of blues, but this is a blue that I think he would run. This would help pay for those 1-cost reactions or 1-cost attack action cards. Also, being able to get go again is something that he really, really likes to do. Olympia, he can use this for the prize Galea. He could use this to play edge ahead or hold them, or maybe boost up the ante a little bit or something like that. And yeah, maybe I don't really know if this is the greatest for Olympia, but he would definitely use it, I think, because like we said earlier, a lot of the warrior blues are not very good. All right, so yeah, this is Point of Contact. This is a card that I think would help all the warriors, and it's got that Tunic section. It's got that instant speed action point, and a little bit of a power buff, and it's a blue block 3. So yeah. All right, let's take a look at another card. So this is the second card that I've designed. This is Rising Steel. This is a 1-cost warrior attack reaction that blocks for 3. It is also majestic, just like Point of Contact. It says, choose up to X, where X is the number of reactions played this chain link. Target weapon attack gets +3. Target weapon attack gets go again. You may attack an additional time with target weapon this turn. So, when Rising Steel resolves, X will always be 1. So you are going to get one of these 3 modes. These are like the super classic warrior modes, right? Getting a buff, getting go again, additional attack with your weapon. But this is below rate. Like a 1-cost +3 is not the greatest because all the reprise cards exist. And a 1-cost red thing that says go again is also underrated because we have cards like Blade Flash, not to mention Glint the Quicksilver. And the third ability is also, not the greatest because Twinning Blade exists. All the things like Duskpath Pilgrimage that say that you can attack an additional time, give a buff. So this card is actually a little bit below rate if X equals 1. However, this card does say number of reactions. So this includes reactions that you do. This also includes reactions that your opponent does. So it is fairly easy to craft a situation where X equals 2 or X equals 3. And when you have X equals 2 or X equals 3, this card starts to shine. So let's break down this card a little bit more. So this is a modal attack reaction that slots into all the warriors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I would see all the warriors using this. So Dorinthia, the classic example is you go grab Singing Steelblade or you have Singing Steelblade, and then you play you tutor for Rising Steel, and then X equals 2 at least. Your opponent is also more likely to play defense reactions if you're playing Dorinthia. So very often this is X equals 3, and this basically combines Glint and Twinning Blade together and can create a very, very, very large turn. This is very, very resource intensive though. So, having Singing Steelblade and a threat that is going to be respected is not easy. But I think this could create, a very, very strong turn for her. Also synergizes with things like Blade Flurry. Obviously, this basically, sometimes you have 2 or 3 pumps, and this allows you to play a pump, and then go with Rising Steel, and then, get all 3 modes, which is very nice. Again, very, very resource intensive, but with Grains of Blood Spill and maybe with Point of Contact, it could be good for her. You could also go Singing Steelblade into Rising Steel. This would also turn on all 3 modes. Bolton. So this is actually a very, very cool interaction with Bolton. If you go Beacon of Victory and you search up the Lumina Ascension, let's say you have Spirit of Arena in play, you can play the play the Lumina Ascension, get your action point back, and then you can play Rising Steel, get an additional attack with the Raiden and a +3, which means it's more likely to hit. And all Bolton players know that, the Lumina turns are really, really important. And this can create a very, very nice triple swing on a Lumina turn, which is really, really nice. This also helps synergize a little bit with Warcry Balana, because it says target rating gains power for the whole turn, so +2. So being able to attack an additional time turns that into 4 damage, which is really nice. Kasai can use this now Kasai does not have a lot of ways to attack an additional time. She just has blood on her hands. So this can basically, create those triple swing turns that, good old Hatchet Dory is able to do. And because her weapon carries the buff the whole turn, this can get a couple extra value that way. And, just having a modal flexible card just creates more smoothness for the Kasai hands. Also, one resource, if you set up enough gold, you can pitch into your gold and get a resource basically. So this could be, there's a lot of skillful ways to use this card in Kasai. If you're playing Fang, this is a card that, you could turn into a Draconic attack reaction. You wouldn't need to select Go Again, but if you have like let's say you have a Draconic attack reaction and then you play this, X equals 2, you can choose the buff and an additional attack. And, if you have any Anthem type of effects, like from Sharpened Senses or Fire and Brimstone or something like that, this could be, a nice, valuable play with Fang. Finally, with Olympia, if you're playing the DGA version or the Hatchets or dual wield version, I think it can slot into both styles. You're probably not going to run this in the DGA version, but I think this would slot nicely into Olympia. As a bonus, you can use the Prize Galea, which would be a reaction, and then you get a little bit of an extra bonus with the Rising Steel. Same with Helm of the Sharp Eye and Vambrace of Determination and all that. So there's some new design space, maybe making equipment for Warrior that has an attack reaction stapled onto it. Could be a nice buff for this card. Yeah. So yeah, this is a card that also, you might want to hold back a little bit, let them play their D-React first, and then you can react with Rising Steel, get a little bit of extra, value from that. And yeah, it could also be free with Point of Contact, hint, hint, hint. So yeah, I think this is a card that, is a nice design because it is a little bit below rate, but if you set it up properly, it can be above rate. And all these effects, the plus power, the go again, the additional attack on the weapon, all synergize with what the warrior class is trying to do. A lot of the largest turns in every warrior often involves attacking multiple times with the weapon. You think about, like, what's the strongest Dorinthia turn? Well, that's triple hitting with Dawnblade. That's triple hitting with the hatchets. What's the strongest Bolton turn? Well, that's via the Vanguard, flash in Illumina, flash in 2 Luminas, and then swing 3 times with Raiden, buffed up by the Luminas, buffed up by the via the Vanguard. What's the best Kasai turn? Well, the best Kasai turn involves, a large blood on our hands and, swinging 4 times with the weapons. What's the best Fang turn? Well, that probably involves Fire and Brimstone, something like Sharpened Senses, and, going real, real wide, maybe, 4 or 5, Long Whisker Loyalty, that type of thing. What's the best Olympia turn? Well, generally that involves hitting twice and, securing the hits for the wagers. So this is a card that fits into all the warriors, and yeah, I think this is a card that is nicely designed. Yeah. All right, so what do you guys at home think? This is like the first time I've ever publicly shown off some cards that are in my mind, and I had to go to a website and design them and all that. So please let me know what you think of my analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of Warrior and these 2 cards. Do you think these cards would be good additions to the game? Are they too broken? Are they overpowered? Are they not juiced up enough? Yeah, just let me know in the comments. I'm gonna be reading those. But yeah, I think these 2 cards, again, like I tried to do at the very beginning, or I told you guys at the very beginning, I wanted to create some thematic evocative cards that are strong but not overpowered, and I wanted cards that address several weaknesses of Warrior and play to the strengths of Warrior. So we have Point of Contact, creating a little bit more smoothness with the extra resource, also the ability to get action points, and that little +1 courage bump is really nice. And being a blue, it can integrate into a lot of different decks. Rising Steel, I just talked about how this can create some very, very powerful turns combined with other things in the warrior class for all 5 of the warriors. So here are 2 cards that I think are pretty good, but please let me know what you guys think. So yeah, this has been Josh Off the Card Guys. Thank you for, checking out this, little bit of a different video. I hope you guys have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey man, did you get the KO deck for Worlds? No one's doing that, okay?
Courage to play the whole horse now. Don't scale it. You're getting greedy. You're doing 2 cards. Put him in the middle for now. That's perfect. All right, next year.
RTN champion.
Yeah, we're gonna have to order a couple more.
Thanks for watching the video.
Here's some more Card Guys videos you might enjoy.